exposing the covert narcissist. They can't stay hidden forever. How long can covert narcissism actually stay hidden? At first, it might feel like they could keep the mask on forever. But the truth is, that's as unlikely as stumbling across a 10-carat diamond on the beach or suddenly winning the Powerball. Possible in theory, but in reality, not very likely. The answer to this question is more complicated than most people expect, because covert narcissism doesn't reveal itself in obvious ways. Part of the confusion comes from the way we use labels like covert and vulnerable. They aren't identical, but they overlap. Vulnerable narcissism, for instance, often shows up as moody, manipulative, withdrawn, or sullen behavior. Traits that don't sparkle like charm and charisma but still carry the same core of self-absorption. Covert narcissism, on the other hand, is best understood as the hidden form of narcissism. It's not the loud, antagonistic, attention-seeking style people are used to spotting. Instead, it hides behind masks that look harmless, even likable. When survivors look back on meeting a covert narcissist, they rarely remember anything flashy. No dazzling charm, no magnetic confidence. Instead, their first impressions often include words like earnest, helpful, funny, smart, or even shy. Some describe someone who seemed anxious in social settings, the kind of person others might want to comfort rather than suspect. That's what makes this version so deceptive. It doesn't look like the classic stereotype. For decades, our culture has painted narcissism as one-dimensional. We've been conditioned by TV shows and movies to picture the arrogant salesperson, the spoiled rich kid with a sports car, or the snobby country club member sneering at everyone else. Those caricatures shaped our understanding, so much so that when someone didn't match that mold, we assumed they couldn't be narcissistic. But research has shown us that narcissism isn't only about arrogance and flash. It's about deeper traits like entitlement, low empathy, and the need for control. And those traits can be packaged quietly, even humbly. This is why people who end up in relationships with covert narcissists often describe it as a slow burn. It doesn't start with fireworks or obvious red flags. Instead, they might notice subtle signs, little put-downs disguised as jokes, occasional grumpiness, a reluctance to spend time with others, or a know-it-all attitude in certain conversations. At first, these quirks seem manageable. Nothing screams narcissist. But with time, the pattern becomes undeniable. The covert narcissist's lack of empathy surfaces in dismissive comments about your feelings. Their entitlement shows in quiet expectations that the needs should always come first. Their need for attention sneaks in through guilt trips or subtle bids for reassurance. And while grandiose narcissists demand admiration with boldness, covert narcissists draw it out with manipulation and self-pity. Same traits, different disguise. So, can covert narcissism really stay hidden forever? That's where it gets tricky. There's no guaranteed timeline. It's not as simple as saying, wait 12 months and you'll see the mask slip. Some people recognize the signs within weeks, while others spend years before realizing what's happening. The duration depends on how close you are to the person, how much they need to reveal to maintain control, and how willing you are to see the truth. What can be said with confidence is this: the mask rarely lasts forever. At some point, whether through subtle cracks or undeniable moments, the truth comes through. And once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. When you look closely at narcissistic behavior, all the criticism, invalidation, manipulation, emotional volatility, and control, you begin to see that it isn't one single thing. It's a mix of many layers. Some of it is unconscious defense, almost automatic, like a reflex that shields them from feelings of vulnerability. Some of it is more deliberate, an attempt to maintain power and keep their deep insecurities and shame from surfacing. Some of it is rooted in trauma, in the fight response that emerges when they perceive threat or rejection. And some of it is simply the inability or unwillingness to reflect on how their behavior impacts others, or even to care about that impact at all. Shame is often the spark that sets everything in motion. When they feel rejected, criticized, compared, or outperformed, the emotions they've worked so hard to keep hidden rise to the surface. Imagine scenarios like these. They're overlooked for a promotion, the boss belittles them, they lose a job, or their friend buys a house that feels like a symbol of superiority. Even small moments, your offhand joke, a casual comparison to your ex, or your brother paying the check at dinner, can be twisted into personal attacks. These events, harmless on their own, can trigger intense and disproportionate reactions in the covert narcissist. And here's where it becomes confusing. If your relationship with them hasn't been filled with obvious betrayal or blatant control, you may not recognize this as narcissism at first. The anger or contempt feels out of sync with the person you thought you knew, but it's so startling that once you see it, you can't unsee it. The mask they wore, sometimes for months or even years, slips, and once it's gone, it rarely returns. It's like releasing an angry genie from a bottle. No matter how hard you try, you can't put it back. How long does it take for this unmasking to happen? There's no universal timeline. For some, it becomes apparent within weeks. For others, it may take years before the cracks show. Even in therapy, where people are examined under a careful and patient lens, the covert pattern can take time to reveal itself. At first, such clients may present with sadness, frustration, anxiety, or endless grievances about how unfair life is to them. They cast themselves as victims of a uniquely cruel world, convinced that injustice follows them more than anyone else. But then comes the turning point. A therapist may gently challenge them, asking for accountability, or encouraging them to consider another perspective. That's often when the mask comes off in the therapy room too. Instead of engaging, the client may lash out, contemptuous, dismissive, or openly angry at the very person trying to help. In that moment, the underlying pattern that was hidden for so long becomes unmistakably clear. When the mask of a covert narcissist begins to slip in therapy, it often looks like contempt disguised as clarity. They may dismiss the therapist outright, sneering at their training or calling the whole process a scam. "I knew therapy was a joke," they might say. "You're just another hack." Sometimes they don't bother with confrontation at all. They simply stop showing up. That's often the breaking point, the moment the carefully constructed facade begins to fracture. It doesn't always happen quickly. For many, it takes 3 to 6 months of sessions before the cracks become visible. By about 4 months, though, therapists frequently start to see the patterns emerge. And it's important to remember, these aren't relationships that began with someone who seemed flashy, domineering, or obviously manipulative. At first glance, things may have seemed solid, even safe. Which is why, when the passive-aggressive comments or sullen, aggrieved behavior finally appear, the partner often turns inward, blaming themselves. Maybe it was something I said. Maybe I pushed too hard. Maybe I'm the problem. Another common question is whether this hidden side can stay hidden for years. The truth? It's rare. That would require nearly perfect conditions, limited contact, a streak of good fortune that keeps major stresses at bay, and a partner who rarely, if ever, challenges them. In most real-world situations, the mask doesn't hold that long. On average, the veneer begins to wear thin within 1 to 2 years. Sometimes the shift comes earlier. Only in unusual cases does it drag on much longer. But here lies the danger. By 1 or 2 years, most people are already deeply invested in the relationship. If they don't understand how covert narcissism works, and how different it is from the overt, grandiose patterns that are easier to spot, the cycle of self-blame and trauma bonding can take firm root. The day-to-day rhythm of such a relationship can be dizzying. Your partner may swing between phases. Some days seem normal, others are clouded by passive aggression or self-pity, and then come the stretches when you find yourself sympathizing with them because their life appears riddled with disappointment. From the outside, you can almost make sense of it, seeing it through the lens of shame, trauma, insecurity, or defense mechanisms. But inside the relationship, the constant emotional shifts take their toll. You're left ricocheting between pity, anger, guilt, frustration, fear, and hope, as though trapped in an endless pinball game. Adding to the confusion is the way covert narcissism hides in plain sight. Friends, colleagues, Even family members may not witness what you see behind closed doors. To others, your partner might appear curt, distant, or a bit difficult, but not deeply problematic. The truly manipulative behaviors, the anger, the guilt-tripping, the subtle emotional hooks, tend to emerge in private, away from witnesses. Vulnerable narcissists may lack the full social charm of their grandiose counterparts, but they still understand enough about perception to keep the harsher dynamics concealed. Think of it like a fragile paint job. It looks smooth from a distance, but the more contact it gets, the easier it is to see the scratches. Once you notice the damage, you can't unsee it. And that's what makes covert narcissism so disorienting. You may still love this person. You may feel tied to them through commitment, compassion, or sheer time invested. You may even cling to the memory of the calm, normal beginnings of your relationship, when everything felt fine. But once the cracks reveal themselves, the reality becomes impossible to deny. By the time that happens, usually within a couple of years, you're already entangled. And that's what makes this pattern not only devastating but profoundly confusing.